Good evening. My name is Kara Howell, and this is my theoretical stance report for Read 7271. I've chosen to complete my report with the balanced interactive approach. I feel like this is the most effective approach for the students that I teach. I'm a sixth grade reading teacher, and I find that this approach is most applicable to my students. So here we go. A balanced interactive approach to literacy states students learn to read and write most effectively when there's a balance between top to bottom and bottom top literacy approaches. So this approach notes that students learn to read with parallel processes between top to bottom and bottom up, that they work simultaneously together. So I think that the skills that you use for top to bottom and bottom to up, or bottom up, if you use them simultaneously, then you're going to have an effective reader. Reading is a simultaneous process with this approach. Students use skills, phonetic skills like decoding, along with opportunities to apply those phonetic skills to reading passages. So again, it's a parallel process, not a linear process. This is a visual for the balanced interactive approach. I like how you've got the triangles flipped side by side, and I feel like it shows the parallel process nicely. The part to whole and whole to part instruction, with the skills that are present at top to bottom, the skills that are bottom up, and I feel like it just visualizes the approach well. All right, so there are two theorists that were proponents of the balanced interactive approach. One of them was David Rumelhart. In 1977, American psychologist David Rumelhart proposed that learning to read does not occur in a linear pattern, but instead occurs in a parallel pattern. He developed his interactive model to note that multiple processors interact and contribute to the overall process of reading. Higher level processes like using background knowledge to apply to a text and knowing how to use context clues for vocabulary. Those processes may impact lower level processes like decoding, so they both simultaneously work together to strengthen each other. Lower level processes may impact higher level processes as well. I noted in the yellow box the processes that contribute to the interpretation of reading. The syntactic information is one of the processes. With syntax, the reader asks or notes what the order of the words are in a sentence. Are they grammatically correct? Orthographic information, that's your visual processing. What is the reader gaining by looking at pictures or visuals? And as a reading teacher, when my students, before we read a whole group text, if the text has pictures in it, we always take a picture walk, and then we talk about inferences gained based on just the pictures alone. So in doing that, they are focusing on their orthographic information processing, which is really interesting. I didn't necessarily know before doing this research that was a process that was focused upon, because I've done that practice for many, many years. Another process in the interpretation of reading according to this approach is the lexical information. That is looking at what the individual words mean, and then the semantic information, that process, the reader notes the meaning of the words or passages being read. So I kind of believe that that's the overall comprehension of what's being read. So according to Rumelhart, those are the 4 processes that simultaneously work together in the interactive balanced approach. Another theory or psychologist that worked with and noted and was a proponent of the balanced interactive approach and actually kind of enhanced Rumelhart's model was Professor Keith Stanovich. He reviewed top-down, bottom-up, and interactive models of reading. He also published an article characterizing all 3, and from that he extended Rumelhart's interactive model with the interactive compensatory model. That model I thought was interesting because that model may actually account for the variation in students' reading levels and abilities. So I thought that was fascinating. That's why I stuck that in the pink box. Stanovich's interactive compensatory model suggests that when one of a reader's processes isn't functioning well, or if there isn't enough knowledge for the processor to be sufficient. So, for example, if a student hasn't had experience, if they're reading a text and they haven't had the experience to connect with the text, or maybe they don't have the background knowledge to apply towards the reading, that processor might not be sufficient. So if that's the case, according to Stanovich, another processor will compensate to help the reader comprehend the text. How do both of those models intersect and build upon one another? Well, because Rumelhart's interactive model suggests that readers have 4 processors that work together. Stanovich then took that information and extended it and noted that as I said earlier, if a processor isn't sufficient or isn't functioning as high as the others, they will compensate for that processor if necessary. How does the balanced interactive approach impact practice? I stated that the balanced interactive approach impacts practice greatly as it's applied across all content areas to meet the diverse needs of students. So I'm going to note on the following slides classroom practices for different groups of students. And the balanced interactive approach is applied to meet their diverse needs. Right, so struggling readers and writers and students with exceptionalities. Many of the students that are currently in my 6th grade reading classes are struggling readers and writers. And I do have 2 sections with students with exceptionality. So I do have 2 collaborative blocks. I stated that struggling readers and writers and students with exceptionalities should be taught to be flexible. And I took that from Tracy Amaro's text. I thought it was interesting. As a flexible reader and writer, students are taught that there is more than one way to understand word meaning and complete various writing tasks. For example, a student could be taught to sound out an unknown word phonetically to gain understanding. But if that doesn't work, they can try using context clues. So as a reading teacher, when I've, taught different reading strategies to students to help them gain understanding, what I was really doing was helping them to be flexible readers and use those different processors to understand words and sentences and paragraphs and texts. When they're taught these practices and they use them, they utilize their different processors. So I feel like struggling readers and writers and students with exceptionalities, we really try to teach them different approaches to gain understanding and gain comprehension. So being a flexible reader and writer, I thought was a pretty powerful strategy. Students that are bi and multilingual, I've not had as much experience with English language learners just in the schools and the areas that I've taught in the past 15 years. But I did note that integrating the balanced interactive model for students who are English language learners is teaching them to be flexible readers as well. So I feel like that flexibility as a reader is applicable to these students as well. Applying different skills to understanding words and sentences and passages will teach them to use different processes. Um, and I also felt like bilingual and multilingual students more than likely rely heavily on their orthographic processing. Um, Visual aids may be proven very effective in teaching those students word meaning. So I feel like the visuals are pretty powerful when you're trying to teach English language learners English words and English, English text. Gifted students, I do have quite a bit of experience teaching gifted students. I've been in gifted education or taught gifted education for 13 of my 15 years. So I really, really deliberately thought about how to use this approach, the balanced approach with gifted students. So in looking at the balanced interactive approach and its application towards gifted instruction, I feel like strengthening the top-down skills may compensate for the weaker bottom-up skills. For example, students are immersed in higher level text, rich literature, and taught advanced vocabulary meaning. Um, so as they're immersed in, this literature that's engaging and enriching and, instructing these gifted students with, higher level vocabulary and these advanced skills, those top down skills are bolstered and strengthened, and those, that bolstering may compensate for a bottom up skill that could be inadequate, like a student's ability to spell. So I've seen that often in gifted students, that their ability to comprehend these higher level texts, and they have vocabulary that's well above their age, yet some of those phonetical bottom up skills might be a little bit weaker. So I feel like the balanced interactive approach may be applied in that regard. And that's where you really see the parallel, because the strengthening of the top down could help those weaker bottom up skills. All right, some strategies and interventions rooted in the balanced interactive approach. One of the strategies, and the one that I wanted to discuss first and note first in my presentation, is guided reading. The guided reading model is an incredibly effective strategy to utilize for all learners. I feel like it promotes the parallel processes of the balanced interactive approach, and it does so through small group instruction. Students gather to read text on their instructional level. And when they are in those small groups, teachers can use that time to focus on skills needed, like decoding, spelling, vocabulary, fluency, and context clue strategies. So guided reading gives a teacher, allows them to have as individualized as possible, small group instruction, to focus on some of those bottom up or skills, like, maybe some phonemic skills, or, focus on decoding, or focus on spelling patterns. And then it also gives them the flexibility to focus on some of those top down skills, like vocabulary, context clue strategies. So when you've got guided reading groups, you can really, really focus on the interaction of all of those skills as they, and then, apply them parallel to